Welcome to WikiPodcast and welcome back. This is the final deep dive in our mini-series looking at the Enlightenment and rationalism. We've spent the last few weeks exploring how that whole period really shifted thinking.
Absolutely. A huge transformation.
And now we're tackling something really fundamental, something central to those thinkers.
Yeah.
How do we actually, know things?
Which brings us squarely to epistemology.
Right, the study of knowledge itself. Sounds pretty weighty.
It is, but it's fascinating. Our mission today is basically to unpack what knowledge even is. We'll be looking at where it comes from, what we mean when we say we know something, and crucially, what its limits might be.
A deep dive, as you said.
Exactly. A deep dive into how we understanding, really.
Yeah.
And our main source for this is the Wikipedia entry on epistemology. It gives a really comprehensive overview.
Okay, so we'll explore different types of knowledge.
Yep. And how we justify our beliefs, what makes us feel confident something's true.
And the big debates around it all.
The major schools of thought, definitely.
Sounds good. Prepare for maybe some aha moments, hopefully, as we figure out how we know what we know. Okay, so basics first. What is epistemology, really?
Well, at its core, epistemology is that branch of philosophy that just digs into the nature, the origin, and the scope, the limits of knowledge.
The theory of knowledge, sometimes called.
That's the one. It's the philosophical look at what knowing actually means.
Yeah.
Epistemologists, they examine concepts like beliefs, truth, and justification.
The building blocks of knowledge.
Pretty much. They're the core elements.
So it's not just like listing facts we know, but asking how we know them and if we're right to.
Precisely. And to get a grip on that, epistemology looks at what supports our beliefs, the sources of justification.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about seeing something like a red apple.
Mm-hmm.
That's perception. Or
Ah.
thinking about your own feelings, introspection. Remembering facts is memory. Using logic, that's reason.
Okay.
And even just believing what someone tells you, that's testimony.
Huh. So my seeing the apple gives me a reason, a justification to believe it's there. Makes sense. Now, is epistemology just describing how we happen to do this? Or is it setting out how we should do it?
Ah, good question. That's a really key distinction. Epistemology is mostly considered normative,
Normative meaning.
meaning it's interested in how we ought to form beliefs. What are the rules? What standards should beliefs meet to count as real knowledge? What should our goals even be when it comes to knowing?
Okay, so it's like the rule book for good believing.
Kind of, yeah. Which makes it different from, say, psychology or cognitive sociology. They tend to be more descriptive.
How so?
They study the beliefs people actually hold and the ways they actually form them, without necessarily judging if those are the best or most reliable ways.
Got it. Epistemology writes the ideal rules. Psychology watches how people actually play the game. Makes sense. What about the word itself? Epistemology. Sounds, well, Greek.
It is. Comes straight from ancient Greek. You've got episteme, meaning knowledge or understanding, and logos, study of or reason.
So literally study of knowledge.
Exactly. But what's interesting is philosophers have been wrestling with these questions forever, millennia even. But the actual term epistemology, it really only caught on in the 19th century as the formal name for this area.
A newer label for a very old game. Okay, we know what it is. Let's get into those central concepts. First up, knowledge itself seems obvious, but what's the philosophical take?
Well, defining knowledge. Turns out it's trickier than you'd think. Generally, yeah, it's awareness, familiarity, understanding, maybe having a skill.
Okay.
But epistemologists often zero in on what's called propositional knowledge.
Propositional.
Yeah, knowing that something is the case. Factual knowledge. So if you can state in a sentence like, Robbie knows that kangaroos hop,
Here.
it's about knowing facts.
Okay, so that's different from knowing how to do something. Like, I know how to ride a bike, but that's not a fact in the same way.
Exactly. That's knowledge how. It's a skill
Yeah.
and ability, non-propositional. And there's also knowledge by acquaintance. That's more about direct familiarity from experience, like knowing the taste of, say, sampa, because you've actually eaten it.
Ah, firsthand experience. So knowing that, knowing how, and knowing by acquaintance.
Got it. Now, the source also mentioned a priori and a posteriori knowledge. Those sound a bit technical.
They are key distinctions, though, about how we know things. A posteriori knowledge is basically knowledge we get through our senses, through experience.
Like seeing the sun is shining.
Exactly, empirical knowledge. It's what science relies heavily on, our everyday observations.
And a priori.
A priori knowledge is stuff we can know without relying on sensory experience. Think mathematical truths like 2 plus 2 equals 4.
You don't need to go out and count objects every time to know that.
Right. It's often linked to reason itself being a source of knowledge. Rationalists tend to emphasize this kind.
So a posteriori is learning from the world. A priori is knowing via pure thought,
Yeah.
roughly.
Yeah, decent shorthand, yeah. And it connects to another pair, analytic and synthetic truth.
An analytic truth is true just by definition because of the meaning of the words, like all bachelors are unmarried.
You don't need a survey for that one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The definition tells you it's true. A synthetic truth, though, depends on how the world actually is. Like snow is white.
You need to look at snow to check that.
Right?
Yeah.
You need empirical evidence. Now, a priori knowledge often lines up with analytic truths and a posteriori with synthetic ones, but the exact relationship. Philosophers still argue about that.
Always more arguments. Okay, this is interesting, but you mentioned a traditional analysis of knowledge earlier. What was that?
Ah, yes. For a very long time, the standard philosophical definition of knowledge was justified true belief, or JTB.
Justified. True. Belief. Seems reasonable. What does that mean?
It means basically 3 conditions have to be met for you to know something.
Huh?
First, you have to believe it.
Okay.
Second, it actually has to be true.
Right. Can't know something false.
And third, you need to have good reasons, justification for believing it. You can't just guess correctly.
Okay, believe it, it's true, and have good reasons. Seems solid. So what's the problem?
The problem came along in the 1960s, famously, with a philosopher named Edmund Gettier.
Gettier problems. I think I've heard of those.
Yeah. He came up with these clever thought experiments, these scenarios, where someone has a justified true belief. But intuitively, we still wouldn't say they actually know it.
How does that work?
Well, imagine you look at a clock on the wall and it says 3 o'clock. So you form the belief it's 3 o'clock.
Okay.
And let's say by sheer coincidence, it is actually 3 o'clock.
Hmm.
So your belief is true.
Right.
And you have justification, you looked at the clock. That's usually a good reason.
Seems fine so far.
But unbeknownst to you, the clock is actually broken. It stopped at 3 o'clock yesterday.
Ah, so you just got lucky that you looked at the broken clock at the exact moment it happened to be correct.
Exactly. You have a justified belief, I saw the clock. And it's true, it is 3 o'clock. But you don't really know it's 3 o'clock based on that broken clock, do you? Feels like luck.
Yeah, that doesn't feel like real knowing. Just a coincidence.
Precisely. These Gettier cases highlight this issue of epistemic luck, getting things right by chance, even with what looks like justification.
So the JTB definition wasn't enough.
It seems not.
Yeah.
It failed to rule out this kind of luck. So philosophers started scrambling to fix it or replace it.
How did they try to fix it?
Lots of ways. Some suggested adding a condition, like your justification can't depend on any false beliefs.
Like the false belief that the clock is working?
Exactly. Others talked about needing a reliable process for forming the belief, or that the belief has to track the truth, meaning you wouldn't believe it if it were false, and you would believe it if it were true.
So trying to build in a stronger connection between the belief and the facts.
Right. Trying to eliminate that element of luck. But honestly, there's still no single definition of knowledge that everyone agrees on. It's still a live debate. Some even think knowledge might be a fundamental concept you just can't break down further.
Wow. So even defining knowing is a puzzle. That's pretty fundamental.
It really is.
Okay, what about the value of knowledge? Why do we care about it? Isn't just having a true belief good enough sometimes?
That's another great question. Knowledge obviously has instrumental value, right? Practical value. Knowing how to fix a car helps you get around. Knowing medicine helps cure illness.
Sure. It helps us achieve goals.
But is knowledge more valuable than just, say, a true opinion or a lucky guess? Plato famously argued yes.
Why?
He thought knowledge was more stable. A true opinion might be right today, but change tomorrow if you hear a counter-argument. Knowledge, being properly justified, is more anchored, more reliable.
Okay. More trustworthy.
That's another idea. We trust knowledge more, especially for important decisions. And some philosophers argue knowledge has intrinsic value. It's good in itself just to know and understand, regardless of practical benefits.
So it's not just about being right, but about having a better, maybe deeper connection to the truth.
Something like that. The value question gets right to why we pursue learning and understanding in the first place.
Okay, moving on slightly. We can't really talk knowledge without talking belief and truth. What are the key points there in epistemology?
Right. Beliefs, from epistemological standpoint, are basically our mental yes or no to propositions. They're mental states about what we take to be the case. I believe the Earth is round.
Our stance on things.
Exactly. Now, truth. Oh boy, that's a whole other can of worms. The most intuitive theory is probably the correspondence theory.
Which says?
A belief or statement is true if it accurately matches reality, if it corresponds to the facts out there in the world.
So the cat is on the mat is true if and only if there really is a cat on a mat. Makes sense. Objective truth.
Right. But it's not the only theory. There's also the coherence theory.
Coherent.
Yeah, this view says a belief is true if it fits logically and consistently within a larger system of other beliefs you hold. Truth is about belonging to a coherent set.
So truth is more about how beliefs relate to each other rather than directly to the world? That sounds more relative.
It can be seen that way, yes.
Yeah.
It depends on the overall system. And there are other theories too, pragmatist theories linking truth to usefulness, deflationary theories that say true isn't a very substantial property. It gets complicated.
But truth, however you define it, is obviously crucial for knowledge.
Absolutely central. It's what we aim for, and it's usually seen as a necessary condition for knowledge. You can't know something false.
And justification, we keep coming back to that. What makes a belief justified then, beyond just having a reason?
Justification is about having good reasons. It's the property beliefs have when they meet certain norms or standards about what we should believe.
The ought again.
Right. It's about the belief being well supported, based on adequate evidence, or formed through a reliable process. It's what separates knowledge from a lucky guess or mere opinion.
But justification doesn't guarantee truth, right? You said that earlier.
Correct. You can have solid reasons to believe something based on the evidence available to you, but that evidence might still be misleading, and the belief could turn out false. Think of historical scientific theories that were well justified at the time, but later proven wrong.
Oh, okay. And there was that distinction, propositional versus doxastic justification. Sounded tricky.
Well, it's a bit subtle. Propositional justification means you have sufficient reason to believe something. The reasons are available to you.
Okay.
Doxastic justification means you hold the belief because of those good reasons. Your belief is actually based on the justification you possess.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine you have lots of strong evidence that your colleague is reliable. You've seen their great work, heard good reports. That's propositional justification for believing they're reliable.
Right.
But maybe you actually believe they're reliable just because you like their corgi pictures on Instagram. In that case, you have good reasons. Propositional justification. But your belief isn't based on those reasons. It's based on the corgis. So you lack doxastic justification. For knowledge, usually you need both. The belief needs to be held for the right reasons.
Got it. The link between the reason and the belief matters.
Exactly.
And the sources of justification, perception, introspection, memory, reason, testimony, epistemology, digs into those too.
Oh, definitely. Perception, for instance. It's not just like a video camera recording reality. Our brains actively interpret sensory input based on expectations, past experiences.
It's constructive.
Right. Memory isn't a perfect playback either. It can fade, distort, even create false memories. Reason involves logic, but also maybe intuition or insight. And testimony. We're constantly making judgments about who to trust and why. Epistemology examines the strengths, weaknesses, and interactions of all these sources.
Man, it really is layers upon layers. Okay, this source also listed a ton of other concepts: rationality, epistemic norms, evidence, doubt, certainty, understanding, wisdom. We can't cover them all, but any quick highlights relevant here?
Full rationality is huge.
Yeah.
It's about thinking and acting based on good reasons, being coherent. Evidence is fundamental, what supports or counts against a belief. Doubt and certainty are crucial, especially when you think about skepticism. Can we ever be really certain?
The big question.
And understanding is interesting too. It's maybe more than just knowing individual facts. It's about seeing connections, the bigger picture. Wisdom often implies applying that understanding effectively in life.
It's like epistemology gives us this whole detailed vocabulary for talking about thinking itself.
It really does.
Okay, let's shift gears. Major schools of thought. Where do we start? Skepticism.
That's a classic starting point. Skepticism, in its various flavors, basically questions our ability to achieve knowledge.
All knowledge.
Global skepticism says, yes, we can't know anything for sure. More limited skepticism might target specific areas, like knowledge of the external world or the future, or other minds.
And the dream argument fits in here.
Perfectly. The idea that, for all you know, you could be dreaming right now. If you can't be certain you're not dreaming, how can you be certain of anything your senses tell you?
That one always messes with my head a bit.
It's a powerful skeptical tool.
Mm.
Pyrrhonian skepticism, an ancient form, actually recommended suspending belief altogether to achieve peace of mind.
Wow. Okay, so what's the counter?
Well, one counter is fallibilism.
Fallibilism.
Fallibilism basically says, okay, maybe we can't have absolute infallible certainty. Maybe we could be wrong. But crucially, fallibilists argue that doesn't mean we can't have knowledge. Knowledge doesn't require absolute certainty. Justifiable belief, even if potentially fallible, can still count.
So knowledge can exist even if it's not perfect or 100% guaranteed.
That's the core idea. It's a more pragmatic stance for many. Then you also have epistemic relativism, which denies universal standards altogether and says knowledge depends on your culture or perspective or something subjective.
Okay, skepticism doubts, fallibilism accepts imperfection, relativism makes it context dependent. Now the big one. Empiricism versus rationalism.
Ah, the classic showdown. We touched on it with a priori knowledge. Empiricism, think Locke, Hume, argues that all knowledge ultimately comes from sense experience. The mind starts as a blank slate, a tabula rasa.
Learning by observing, touching, hearing.
Exactly. All the raw materials for thought come from the senses. Rationalism, think Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, disagrees. They argue that reason itself is a source of some knowledge, independent of experience.
Like math or logic.
Those are prime examples. Rationalists might posit innate ideas or structures in the mind that allow us to grasp certain truths directly through reason or intuition.
So experience versus reason as the primary source, a fundamental split.
Absolutely. Though many philosophers, like Kant later on, tried to synthesize elements of both.
Okay, what about how knowledge is structured? Foundationalism versus coherentism.
Right. This is about the architecture of justification. Foundationalism pictures our knowledge system like a building.
A building.
Yeah. It rests on a foundation of basic beliefs. These are beliefs that are justified directly, maybe through perception or self-evidence, and don't need justification from other beliefs.
Like I feel pain, or maybe I seem to see red.
Potentially, yes. Those are candidates. All our other non-basic beliefs then form the superstructure, and they get their justification by being linked back down to that solid foundation.
Okay, a base and then layers built on top. What about coherentism?
Coherentism rejects the idea of a foundation. It uses the metaphor of a web or a raft instead.
A web.
Yeah, a belief isn't justified by resting on some ultimate base,
Yeah.
but by how well it fits together, how coherently it interlocks with all your other beliefs. Justification comes from mutual support within the whole system.
So it's about consistency and explanatory power within the network.
Exactly. Consistency, connections, mutual support. There are no privileged basic beliefs. Every belief's justification depends on its relationship to the whole web.
Foundationalism needs a solid ground. Coherentism needs everything to hang together nicely.
That's a good way to put it. And, of course, there are attempts to mix them, like foundherentism, and even weirder views like infinitism, which says justification is an infinite chain with no endpoint.
An infinite chain! My brain hurts thinking about that. Okay, one more major contrast. Internalism versus externalism.
Right. This one's about what factors count towards justification. Internalism says only factors internal to the believer's mind matter.
Things I'm aware of. My thoughts, my sensory experiences, my other beliefs.
Pretty much. Things you can access through reflection or introspection. Evidentialism, the view that justification depends on having evidence you possess, is typically internalist. You need to be aware of the evidence.
Okay, and externalism.
Externalism says that at least some factors relevant to justification can be external to your mind, outside your conscious awareness.
Like what?
Like how reliable the process that produced your belief actually is, or the causal connection between your belief and the fact in the world, or how good your eyesight actually is, even if you're not thinking about it.
Why would that matter?
Well, externalists often argue that justification should be linked to truth. Reliable processes are more likely to produce true beliefs. So the reliability of the process itself, whether you're aware of it or not, contributes to justification.
So reliabilism is an externalist view.
Yes, a major one. A belief is justified if it comes from a reliable cognitive process. Virtue epistemology is often externalist too, focusing on whether the belief arises from stable, truth-conducive intellectual virtues or abilities.
Okay, internalism, it's all in your head. Externalism.
The connection to the outside world matters too, even if you don't know all the details.
That captures the core distinction, yes. And these different schools offer vastly different pictures of what it takes to know something. Absolutely fascinating. And wow, looking at the source material, it just explodes from there. Branches like formal epistemology using logic, experimental epistemology using empirical data,
Social epistemology, looking at groups. Feminist epistemology, examining gender's role. Decolonial epistemology, challenging Western dominance.
supplied epistemology, metapistemology, even historical epistemology, looking at how the concept of knowledge itself has changed. It's huge.
It really shows how this core question, how do we know, touches almost everything. You see connections to psychology, logic, education, anthropology, sociology.
And the history stretches way back, doesn't it? Ancient Greece, India, China,
Yeah.
medieval thinkers grappling with faith and reason.
Then the massive shifts during the Enlightenment with Descartes, Locke, Hume, Kant, leading right up to the 20th century with Gettier, reliabilism, naturalized epistemology. It's a constantly evolving conversation.
So after all that, what does this mean for you, the listener? Hopefully this deep dive has maybe given you a framework, some tools for thinking about knowledge.
Yeah, it's different kinds, how we try to justify it, the big debates about its nature and limits.
From those ancient skeptics right up to modern views, that quest to understand knowing has been central, especially in the Enlightenment period we've been focusing on in this series.
Maybe take a moment to consider your own knowledge. Where does it come from? Perception, reason, testimony from others. What are your beliefs really resting on?
Because exploring epistemology isn't just, abstract philosophy. It's practical. It helps you critically look at information, evaluate claims, understand why you believe what you believe.
But what part of all this stood out most to you? Was it the Gettier problems, the empiricism, nationalism debate, the idea of fallibility?
And here's maybe a final thought to ponder. If our actual understanding of knowledge itself is always being questioned, refined, debated, what does that imply about how certain we can be about any single thing we think we know?
It definitely suggests maybe a bit of intellectual humility is a good thing, a constant questioning.
Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.